Okay, so this is for all of you who are newly teaching or wanting to teach, feeling called to, and also for those who are going to teachers, especially if they're fresh off the block, so to speak. Okay. Look, there's a reason why it traditionally people took time to marinate before coming out as a teacher. And oftentimes they would be asked by their teacher or by their tradition, but we're in a new time. So I honestly, truthfully, I marinated in the awakening for a full 9 years before coming out as a teacher. And for me, teaching was it had to come from an invitation from somewhere because I didn't have lineage. What I was wondering where's the invitation coming from? Okay. Because it wasn't coming from ego and it wasn't coming from a desire that I have to share, I have to spread the news, because that happens in the beginning, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But for me, teaching, the invitation came from life itself. So I waited. Not only was I marinating in unity consciousness and where I knew everything was that and felt undivided inside, um, I still wanted to wait for the invitation. And somehow it came, and I was really prepared to do something else. I actually had a whole other possibility of what I could do. So my prayer was to be non-harming as possible and to not stop the growth that was happening here, to not have it limit my growth, and to remain as possible, humble as possible. I stick to that as much, I'm not saying it's perfect, but I stick to that. Now, coming back to the desire to teach. In the beginning, when you first have the fresh awakening, fresh realization of, it's usually mind, where awareness wakes up to itself. It's a mind awakening, is what I call it. And in the beginning, there can be sort of this passion to want to share. And I remember when I became a vegetarian in my early 20s, I was annoyingly passionate about wanting to share, vegetarianism. And I was doing a lot of yoga. And I was like passionate about sharing about how good yoga was for the body and all that stuff. I was a bit on a trip. And it was kind of sweetly innocent, but probably a bit annoying. So I know what it's like to have this kind of fire inside to share. Thing is that traditionally people have waited, to teach, and there's been a reason for it. And good 10 years, they say, cook for a good 10 years, and generally it's been within a tradition. But nowadays, you know, everything's getting shaken up. And I was one of the people that I'm one of the people that's teaching without being in a particular lineage. And I don't think that one has to be, okay, at all. That's not my point. And I'm not even making a point that whatever people are doing is wrong. But I can list a few reasons why it's not the best idea to teach right away. Okay. One of them is that this is just the beginning of the spiritual journey, the realization that of mind waking up to itself. Okay. Even if realization has come to the heart, where heart is waking up and knows itself as love. Okay. Even then, it's what they call a tipsy baby Buddha, where you're a baby Buddha and you don't really have your sea legs yet. And the baby Buddha is just kind of excited to share about its newfound nature, but it isn't marinated, okay? And so when we teach, when we come out and we want to share too soon. It's almost like it's kind of like it's first of all, it's spilling over something that really it it behooves one to preserve and to be able to marinate it and let it really sink in and do its job. So if one is overly kind of exuberantly sharing and feeling drawn to that, instead of preserving the energy, you know, reining it in and let that truth sink and marinate and become embodied. And there's so much more. Let me tell you, awakening is a journey. And many of you know this. It's not just the beginning. There's the middle and there's on and on and on. And what about now? What about in this circumstance? Is realization still here? What about when you're feeling, how do you include your humanness and your sadness and your grief and your life as it is? And so what one is sharing, if one is newly cooked, is the tip of the iceberg. Okay. So that's the first thing. And is that wrong or bad? No, not necessarily. The tip is, but it's not like it's hurting other people per se, but it might be hurting oneself because then it's not really permitted and given the allowance and the quiet and the sanctuary to descend and to integrate. Okay. Now, the other piece is that spirituality, it wants to be used out in the world. It wants to be practiced. And I was touching on that a minute ago. And it wants to be exercised, okay? And the thing is if we're sharing too soon, okay, before it's really all the way marinated, and that can take some years, we might be losing touch with truth, especially if some identity is being created by being a teacher in the world. So if one is newly realized or in the first few years of the flush of realization and one is sharing, there can be it can start to devalue and kind of thin out what's taking place here. And it can even not be noticed, okay? Especially if other people are starting to give you feedback that's very positive, and let's say the self-center hasn't been flushed out properly. Some of the power center could grab onto that and say, ooh, look at all those YouTube numbers, and I'm just getting so popular, and recognition. Well, that is going to start to rob realization and not allow it to really, really marinate. And so it's going to be you're going to be substituting success or just some acknowledgement and human, we love to be seen and we love to be acknowledged. And then that is going to start to replace truth. And the other piece is that one might stop growing, because if you have a message, let's say you're into, I don't know, the transcendent, or I don't know what part of the message, maybe you're trying to find a message and just speak about what is going to get the most views. Not a great idea, by the way. You can turn anything into commodity, and anything could be turned into a commodity, including your freedom. You could be selling your freedom. And that's one of the reasons why it's been advised historically to wait. Okay. And also, you might box yourself in. And let's say your message has a certain flavor. Oh, everything's consciousness. And everybody starts to really love what you're saying. This is an example. And then let's say the truth wants to go deeper and wants to get embodied and wants to start embracing your humanity and everything. But everybody knows you as that kind of teacher. You might not, that growth that keep going growth of just keep going might get stymied and stopped, and you might get boxed in by your own sharing, what you're sharing. Your growth might stop. That's the other reason why sharing too soon is not such a great idea. Okay, so that's my little spiel on sharing truth too soon. Be aware, remain as humble as possible, and catch yourself if it's and be truthful and honest as possible. Is this stopping my growth? And for the people who are not teaching and who are going to these teachers and everything, just realize that there's depth upon depth to you and to us and to truth and to reality. And it keeps deepening and marinating. And so if you're going to teachings and getting teachings that are only from the surface, maybe that's supportive for where you're at, but just remain aware that as you deepen, what you're receiving is also needing to be deeper. Okay? So, be compassionate and kind and understanding to yourself if something doesn't resonate anymore, and kind of realize, oh, I'm growing out of that piece of everything is consciousness. Well, what about my feelings? What about my humanity? How does that get integrated? All right, so that's it. Not trying to make anything wrong. Um, all right. Be well as always. Take care.